On the morning of September 11, 2001, 19 terrorists affiliated with the extremist group Al-Qaeda carried out a coordinated attack on the United States by hijacking 4 commercial airplanes. The operation, meticulously planned for years, involved splitting into 4 teams, each with a designated pilot trained in the United States. At around 8 o'clock, the hijackers boarded their respective flights, blending in with regular passengers. These flights were American Airlines Flight 11 and United Airlines Flight 175, both departing from Boston and targeting the north and south towers of the World Trade Center in New York City. American Airlines Flight 77, departing from Washington Dulles International Airport and targeting the Pentagon, and United Airlines Flight 93, departing from Newark and ultimately crashing in Pennsylvania after passengers intervened. At approximately 8:14 a.m. on American Airlines Flight 11, the first signs of the hijacking began. The hijackers used box cutters, which they had smuggled through security, to attack and kill the flight crew, gaining control of the cockpit. They then redirected the plane towards New York City. The hijackers announced a command to the passengers, falsely reassuring them that they were returning to the airport, a tactic used to prevent immediate panic and resistance. Similar tactics were employed on United Airlines Flight 175, which was hijacked around 8:42 a.m. This flight was also rerouted towards New York City, with the hijackers taking over the cockpit and making threatening announcements to the passengers. American Airlines Flight 11 struck the North Tower of the World Trade Center at 8:46 a.m., causing a massive explosion and initiating a fire that would ultimately lead to the building's collapse. United Airlines Flight 175 hit the South Tower at 9:03 a.m., similarly resulting in catastrophic damage and a deadly fire. The impact of these crashes was broadcast live on television, capturing the world's attention and sparking immediate responses from emergency services and government agencies. Meanwhile, American Airlines Flight 77 was hijacked around 8:51 a.m. The hijackers on this flight also used box cutters to overpower the crew and passengers, seizing control of the cockpit and directing the plane towards Washington, D.C. At 9:37 a.m., Flight 77 crashed into the western side of the Pentagon, the headquarters of the United States Department of Defense, causing extensive structural damage and a deadly fire. United Airlines Flight 93 presented a different outcome due to the actions of its passengers. Hijacked at around 9:28 a.m., the flight was directed towards Washington, D.C., with the White House or the Capitol believed to be the intended target. Passengers and crew, informed about the earlier attacks via phone calls, collectively decided to fight back against the hijackers. In the ensuing struggle, the hijackers lost control of the plane, which ultimately crashed into a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, at 10:03 a.m. The passengers' bravery prevented further loss of life and potential devastation at a significant national landmark. The hijackers had chosen early morning flights, which were relatively less crowded and carried large amounts of fuel to maximize the damage. They exploited security gaps, as the Transportation Security Administration and other stringent security measures were not yet in place. The box cutters used in the attacks were legally permitted on flights at the time, highlighting the inadequacy of existing airline security protocols. The coordinated nature of the attacks, involving precise timing and predetermined targets, demonstrated a high level of planning and commitment by Al-Qaeda. The immediate and devastating impact of the hijackings not only resulted in significant loss of life and property, but also reshaped global politics, leading to the war on terror and substantial changes in aviation security worldwide. The September 11 hijackers managed to breach airport security through a combination of exploiting existing vulnerabilities, using seemingly innocuous items, and taking advantage of the relatively lax security protocols of the time. Here's a detailed look at how they managed to carry out their plans. Pre-boarding preparations. 1. Identification and tickets. The hijackers obtained valid IDs and tickets for their flights, often using their real names. This was facilitated by Al-Qaeda's logistical support, which included securing the necessary documents and finances. Many of the hijackers had also taken steps to blend in, adopting Western dress and mannerisms to avoid drawing attention. 2. Reconnaissance and dry runs. Prior to September 11, several of the hijackers conducted reconnaissance missions, taking numerous domestic flights to understand airport security procedures and identify potential weaknesses. This allowed them to familiarize themselves with the process and practice their tactics. Security screening. 1. Security checkpoints. Airport security in 2001 was significantly less stringent than it is today. The screening process focused mainly on detecting metallic objects, and there were fewer restrictions on what could be carried onto planes. Box cutters, the primary weapon used by the hijackers, were not explicitly banned and were considered permissible tools. The hijackers also carried small knives, which were allowed under Federal Aviation Administration (FAA) regulations at the time. 2. Minimal threat perception. Security personnel were primarily trained to prevent hijackings where the intent was to negotiate or divert the plane, not to use the plane as a weapon. This lack of anticipation for such a catastrophic scenario contributed to the hijackers' ability to smuggle their weapons on board. The security focus was on preventing bombs and guns from being brought onto planes, rather than small, seemingly harmless items like box cutters and utility knives. 3. Screening procedures. Passengers and their carry-on luggage were screened by X-ray machines and walked through metal detectors. Given the volume of passengers and the limitations of the technology at the time, it was possible for small metal objects to be overlooked or deemed non-threatening. The hijackers likely placed their items in carry-on bags that passed through the X-ray machines without raising suspicion. Coordinated boarding. The hijackers boarded in teams, often spreading out across the plane to position themselves strategically. This enabled them to simultaneously rise and take control of the aircraft once the plan was in motion. By boarding like regular passengers and not drawing attention to themselves, they avoided arousing suspicion from either the crew or fellow passengers. On-board takeover. 1. Timing and coordination. The hijackers waited until the planes were in the air and had reached a certain altitude before making their move. This timing was crucial, as it minimized the possibility of immediate intervention from ground personnel or passengers still boarding. By choosing flights that were scheduled to depart around the same time, the hijackers ensured that their actions would be nearly simultaneous, further complicating any coordinated response from air traffic control or military defense systems. 2. Violence and intimidation. Once airborne, the hijackers quickly and violently subdued flight attendants and passengers to assert control over the plane. The use of box cutters allowed them to threaten and incapacitate crew members without the need for more conspicuous weapons. They were able to force their way into the cockpit, where they either killed or incapacitated the pilots and took control of the aircraft. 3. Communication and deception. The hijackers used the aircraft's intercom systems to make announcements, often in English, to mislead passengers about their intentions, claiming that they were returning to the airport or making other reassuring statements. This bought them critical time to complete their takeover without immediate resistance from passengers who were unaware of the broader plot. Post-event security overhaul. The events of 9/11 exposed significant flaws in airport security and prompted a comprehensive overhaul of aviation security protocols. 1. Establishment of the TSA. The Transportation Security Administration, TSA, was created to standardize and enhance security procedures across all U.S. airports. This included stricter screening processes, advanced technology for detecting prohibited items, and more thorough background checks for airport personnel. 2. Restricted items and enhanced screening. Items like box cutters, knives, and other potential weapons were explicitly banned from carry-on luggage. Screening procedures became more rigorous, with the introduction of full-body scanners and advanced X-ray technology to detect non-metallic threats. 3. Cockpit security. Cockpit doors were reinforced and equipped with locks that could only be opened from the inside to prevent unauthorized access. Pilots were also trained in defensive maneuvers and protocols to respond to hijacking attempts. 4. Air Marshal Program. The Federal Air Marshal Service was expanded, placing armed undercover officers on flights to deter and respond to potential threats. The hijackers' ability to breach security on 9/11s was a result of exploiting existing gaps and underestimations within the aviation security framework of the time. The subsequent changes have aimed to address these vulnerabilities and prevent similar attacks in the future.